Welcome back to another podcast. We're sitting here with Luke Reedy, a fantastic lawyer here in London at the Millar's Lawyers law firm. Big news. There was a case that's gotten to the point where we're now starting to hear about it in the media. And I just got a couple of questions for you. Biggest one is Jennifer Crumbley. What happened?
This is huge news. Unprecedented case. Jennifer Crumbley is the biological mother of Ethan Crumbley. Now, Ethan Crumbley was convicted of the mass shooting that happened in Michigan 2 years ago. So this is unprecedented because Jennifer Crumbley has been convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Never before has someone been convicted of involuntary manslaughter because of the criminal actions of their child.
I guess the first question that anybody, especially parents out there, are going to initially ask themselves is, so does that mean that parents are now criminally responsible for the actions of their children? Does this change the name of the game forever, or what does this mean?
Yeah, that seems to be the general sentiment, as everyone is worried, especially people or parents that do allow their children to shoot firearms. Right? There's this panic now. Do I need to get rid of these firearms? But the answer is yes and no. Right? Well, this is the very first time a parent has ever been charged and convicted with involuntary manslaughter because of the criminality of their children. It's long been the case that parents are held responsible either collaterally or in some way, some connection to the actual criminality of the children, right? For instance, it's normal and regular practice to see in cases where children get access to a gun that the parents would also face charges relating to gun ownership, right? So failure to properly store firearms, to allow access to a minor, charges like that, right?
Can't remember exactly how it's worded in certain regions, but contributing to the delinquency of a minor, is that something that's also because you're giving them access to those firearms? Or
so again, it's going to be state specific, right? Again, we'll get into the stuff in Canada, not so much in Canada, right? But that could be, depending on the legislation within the specific state, that could be one of the charges. But usually it's not. They usually find a way to actually separate it from the criminality of the minor, because what they want to make them separate things. They want to show that the youth is accountable or should be held accountable for their own actions, and the parent has created this other criminally negligent act, and they should be held responsible for that act, right? This case is unique because she's been convicted of involuntary manslaughter because of her son's actions, right? Directly. Not that she, allowed access to the firearms, although those all contributed to it. That's why it's unique here. So now you think about it. Think about the cases that we've seen recently. If you're familiar, do you remember the Deja Taylor case? That was the mother of the 6-year-old boy who shot his teacher. In that case, the mother was held criminally responsible for a number of different acts, but not for the shooting of the teacher, right? So she was convicted for not indicating that she was a marijuana user when she purchased her firearm, and hiding that breached federal firearm ownership laws. So that's where the conviction was. It's not circumventing, but you know what I mean? It's a roundabout way for holding somebody criminally responsible without actually saying they're directly responsible for their child's actions. So to answer your question, in general, no. Parents don't need to fear that now there's going to be this big change in the law. This case is really unique. In most cases, parents are not aware that their child either has a gun, has taken the gun, has mental health problems. But in this case, the facts that describe the parent's behavior really led to this conviction. Right? Just to mention a few, they were well aware that he had mental problems. There's evidence that Ethan Crumbley told his mother that he was seeing demons. He was begging them to take him to see a doctor. She wouldn't, right? And I say she just because Jennifer Crumbley's been convicted, but just so you're aware, her husband's also facing the same set of charges, right? They knowingly allowed him to go to school with these issues. And actually, on the day of the actual shooting, there was the potential intervention. Like the school found these drawings he'd done and these desperate phrases he'd written on top of the drawings with shootings, and he was trying to get access to bullets at the school. It was a strange set of circumstances, and the school called the parents, brought them in, and said, "You got to take him to a doctor now."
Yeah,
please.
They requested that they take him off premise.
That's it. And the parents just said, "No, this is your problem, right? There's no issue here. You deal with this." But at that stage, you would think when the drawings depict such violence, and when there's guns and shooting, and he's looking for bullets, there's definitely the requirement of the parents to at least notify the administrators and the teachers at the school that this child might have access to a gun. And if you, even to back it up, knowing his mental health problems, denying him access to doctors, the weekend before, they just went out and bought him a handgun. All these things, when you put them all together, the facts here show that the parents' level of culpability is significant, right? So that's really what's different in this case. So I don't think parents in general need to, worry about this big sweeping change. I just think that if a parent is at this level of negligence, then they've got obviously serious problems.
Right. And I think you kind of covered some of it here, but ultimately I'd be very curious to understand a little bit about the legal pathway. Effectively, if this has never happened, if there's never been a case where someone was convicted for their son's actions in this regard, then how were they able to attain this conviction?
So I guess the starting point here is that Michigan has these laws that they've got legislation that can be used to hold parents liable. And the first parent has a legal duty to exercise the care and control of their children in a way that ensures the safety of others, right? Basically, kids or parents need to make sure that their children don't hurt other children, right? They need to exercise their parenting skills in a way to ensure that. So that's a unique part right there. So in this case, the judge did a really good job of informing the jury on how to convict. You basically said that there's two real paths to conviction here. The first one is that the mother has her actions have been grossly negligent, right? The example of that could have been, access to the firearms, the positive things she did that result in gross negligence. But the other side, which I think, or my position is this is probably what the jury convicted on, are the omissions, right? And that's going back to that requirement, right? There's a duty in Michigan to ensure that your children are raised and supervised so that they don't hurt others, right? And her failure in that duty is what resulted in the death, right? So they could have convicted either or. The jury didn't even need to agree on which one they personally believed the prosecution, not the Crown in this case, had proven. But either one, either that her actions were grossly negligent, or that her failures to abide by her duties were also grossly negligent. It's
awesome to get the kind of legal consensus from here, but you've been exposed to many, many criminal cases over the years. I'm just genuinely curious, on a personal level, do you think that parents should be, in this case, do you think parents should be held criminally responsible for the actions of their children, or?
It's a tough one. So in cases like this, it's easy to say yes, right? Whenever I see or hear or read about a child involved in a mass shooting or a school shooting, my first thought is, where are the parents? Why wasn't there earlier intervention? What mistakes were made along the way that led the child to get here, right? So that's my first thought. But in general, I absolutely disagree with the idea of holding parents responsible for the criminal actions of their child. And the reason being is because you got to look at the root causes of youth criminality, right? It's children are good. They're not generally going to be involved in these type of situations. In my position, what I'm seeing is the root causes almost exclusively across the board are poverty, absentee parents, and parents that don't provide their children with support, right? So now, when we look at holding parents responsible, criminally responsible, we got to consider how the criminal law holds people responsible. And it's typically either, punitively, there's fines, or some type of restriction on freedoms. And, everyone is expecting in this case a serious level or serious amount of jail time, right? Incarceration. And in my position, it seems that those consequences are just going to exacerbate the problem. You're going to have parents suffer financial penalties where, poverty is a leading cause, and you're going to put them in jail, which is further going to lead to a lack of supervision and a lack of support. So generally, I can't support the idea of holding parents criminally responsible for their children's actions.
The cases that we've talked about so far take place in Virginia and in Michigan. We're talking from Canada. So I guess I think a big chunk of this audience is going to kind of wonder exact same thing that I'm thinking right now, which is what can parents in Canada expect when it comes to similar consequences in cases like these?
So as far as similar cases, I guess the first things we have to be specific about the charges here. Jennifer Crumley's been charged and convicted of involuntary manslaughter. And I think it's highly unlikely that something like that would happen here in Canada. And that's largely because we first of all, don't have that same legal duty that they have in Michigan, right? To ensure that your children don't hurt other people. But also our manslaughter requirements are a bit different. The requirement is that your actions would make it legally foreseeable that death was a likely occurrence of your actions, right? So I can't see that happening. But parents are held responsible for their children's actions in Canada here as well, right? So first off, anytime a parent is a party to an offense, if they encourage it, if they counsel it, if they aid or abet, so if they're involved in any way like that, then absolutely they're going to be held responsible and equally responsible to the child. But there's also another path, right? So there's the idea of holding a parent responsible under the charge of criminal negligence, right? And specifically in cases like this, criminal negligence causing death. Now, a person's criminally negligent when they do something or they omit to fulfill a duty. And that's kind of similar to that law in Michigan, right? The omission of a duty. Now, for criminal negligence, the idea is that in doing something or omitting to doing something, a person's actions are a marked and substantial departure of how a reasonable person would act under the circumstances, right? So now that charge is typically used in driving cases, when people are being reckless on the highway and they end up crashing and killing somebody, something like that. They're looking for a substantial and marked departure from that of a reasonable person. But that same logic can be kind of applied a little bit differently to fit cases like this. Like, for instance, in Canada, parents do have a requirement to provide the necessities of life up until a child is 16, right? Now, a prosecutor could easily argue that the failure to provide the necessities of life or the supervision required, right, because that would be included, resulted in the child getting hold of the gun, right? And that resulted in the death. Now, the question there then would be, is that failure to supervise and to provide the necessities, was that a marked and substantial departure from that of a reasonable person? And if it is, then that person can be held responsible for criminal negligence causing death. And again, it's a bit of a roundabout way. Consequences would be significant, right? But they would be held responsible for the criminal actions of the child.
The way you're describing it, I just kind of want to get to see if I'm understanding this correctly, is the concern is really that it's involuntary manslaughter that's being brought, that there are other existing laws on the books, for example, them knowing that he has mental health issues and then not locking up the weapons and those kinds of things.
Yeah, that is my point. My point is that there are other avenues to bring charges against parents. But don't get me wrong, this is really unique in the sense that this is the first time they've ever convicted somebody of manslaughter. Manslaughter obviously comes with much greater penalties, and especially in the States when we're looking at life sentences that can be, hundreds of years long, right? The prosecution in convicting, what they've done is they've created a blueprint, right? There's now this precedent that other prosecutors can rely on when it comes to cases like this. I think that it would be extreme cases where you can show that the parents were grossly negligent, right? That's kind of the message here, is that when parents are grossly negligent, there is now this new pathway to find the parents criminally responsible for the death caused by their child, and that's significant, right? So I think that's going to bring a lot of positive responses from people that are worried about school shootings, and I think the hope is that it will result in parents becoming more involved, right? The last thing, though, I want to see, and I think it's a genuine concern, is that when you're talking about penalizing parents for the actions of their children, historically that's also been used to further racist ideals, right? Mm-hmm. It's unequally applied. It's typically you'll see white parents getting away with things when parents of color are penalized for the same actions, and then again it's going to be people in lower socioeconomic brackets, and it's just going to exacerbate a problem that needs a different remedy.
The other thing that occurred to me when we were talking about this, and it's something that a number of other commentators have kind of brought up, is the role that the school and the administration played in this. And the only reason I want to ask is not because I think there's a significant amount of fault that's laid there, but a lot of people are pointing out that, when the school says, hey, we need you to take them off premise, and the parents say no, that the school is in some ways accountable for not taking the next step, calling police officers in, doing something like that. And again, I don't necessarily want to get into, are they actually accountable? It's just, does this open up a door for those administrative individuals also to be concerned about being held accountable for the actions of the students that they're watching?
I don't think so, right? The big difference being is that the school doesn't have the same positive duty on behalf of an individual student not to injure another student, right? They obviously have a general obligation. I definitely think that, without getting into the weeds here, that there would be concern from the administrators and the teachers at the school, because at a minimum, they personally believe that there was a problem there. We know that because the call that was made that morning. They acknowledged that they thought Ethan should have been removed from the campus, and in failing to do so, they definitely could be held liable for the consequences. I don't think that would be criminal. I think that the way they'd be held responsible would be through civil litigation. They'd be held civilly responsible.
And then, just, I guess, what are your last thoughts about this? This is, like you said, a kind of groundbreaking, pivotal moment. It's going to set precedent, and now we're going to see how cases come out over the next couple of years as a result of it. But what are your thoughts about this entire subject?
Well, there's one thing that's been kind of bothering me about it, right? And that's the timing of this conviction, right? Ethan pled guilty, I want to say about a year ago, could be a little more, a little less. But he pled guilty. There was over 20 charges. The most serious of them are 4 counts first-degree murder and terrorism charges. Significant charges. He's going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Part of his sentence was with life, and then no eligibility for parole. And in that sentencing, I remember the judge saying that that Ethan was the only one to blame. He was the one that was responsible for this, and him alone. Now, to me, I can't reconcile that sentence with this new sentence and even the arguments of the prosecution, right? So what they're saying here is that Ethan's mother is responsible for a cause or the cause of the death of these children because she failed to intervene knowing that her child suffered serious mental health issues, right? If there's serious mental illness here, and the mother's lack or failure to get involved is what led to these deaths, then how can Ethan be the lone and only cause of these deaths? It seems that logically, by saying that the mother's to blame by not intervening, then there has to be logically some diminished responsibility on behalf of Ethan. Now, I'm not saying Ethan is innocent. Like the test for mental health is completely different. But my point is that those two things are not the same, right? He can't be the lone fault, the lone person responsible for this, and his mother can't be the one that caused this by failing to get him mental health help. Right? Those two things are incongruent. And if I was in Ethan's position, I would be looking at appealing my sentence. He's 15 years of age when this happened. A 15-year-old held responsible for this for the rest of his life. And maybe that's right. But either way, I think that this case shows that he wasn't the only one responsible, that there was a path that was paved for him by his parents that led to where we are. I'm saddened when I read that he was begging for mental health help. That's what else can you say? Like, for someone to recognize the issues that they have, to be begging their parents for help, and then to be denied that, I don't think you can say that person then alone is responsible for everything that happened after.